Amy Siegel. I'm one of the co-founders of S2N Health. In normal times, we're in Boston, and we have a team that works with innovators in healthcare technology, helping them with market and business strategy. So we have two amazing speakers today for our virtual Pine Street event. We also have a lot of our team on. So team, you want to say hello? I don't know if we can unmute quickly. Say hello, team.
Hi, Charles Peglione here. Nice to meet everyone. Good morning.
I think we have Sam and Max and Kristen.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. Glad to be here.
Sort of meet.
And I think it's so important to introduce the team because we're all sort of leaning on our teams now. I grabbed this picture from the last time, right before we were headed over to Pine Street to volunteer and serve dinner. And, you know, it's part of our culture as S2N to volunteer at Pine Street as part of our clients' culture too. And Maria had a picture of you in a hairnet that I almost had on there, but at the last minute, I thought better of it, but that's what that. I was next to you in a hairnet too, but that's what makes our relationship with Pine Street so special. When we founded S2N in 2011, we said we're going to give back to the community. That's part of who we are, and we realized none of our clients really want to go to a boring Christmas party or anything like that, but they all want to give back. They all want to serve, and they're all like Maria, super busy. So we thought, well, why don't we do both at the same time? We can organize this great event for them. We get together in sort of a little cabal and talk about some topic of interest to our industry, and then we walk down to Pine Street and we serve dinner together. And it's just always been such a heartwarming, inspiring event. Also to interact with the Pine Street guests. I did get one marriage proposal once, which was memorable. I said no, but they're just such a wonderful group of people, the staff and the guests, and we're so honored to have two great speakers today, the first one being the president of Pine Street. So I will turn it over to Lyra Downey. She has been president of Pine Street since 2000, so really has spearheaded what I call an organization that's a quiet giant out there fighting homelessness. We don't even realize the impact they've had. They just go about their work. So Lindy is going to share some photos of what it's like to run Pine Street during a pandemic and tell you a bit about the organization. And if you're inspired during her talk to donate, we'll put the donate link in the chat bot. And it's also here. So please, this is through our team. You can also go to Pine Street directly. And just before we get started, a big thank you to MassMEDIC for running the Zoom, for helping to organize this whole event. Rachel, you've been a godsend. Thank you. So Rachel, if you have questions for either Lyra or Maria when she talks next, put them in the chat bot and Rachel will help moderate those questions. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Lyra.
Great. Amy, thank you. And I want to say thank you to everybody at S2N. You have been amazing partners at every level, generous. You've been wonderful about coming into the building and helping us serve. And, you know, there's a lot of things we've missed during this pandemic. We've missed being with each other. But not having volunteers in the building, I think for us has been a huge, how else can I put it, a huge spiritual loss. We just miss having the interface, and the guests really miss seeing people come in, and it certainly made things a lot less fun, I will say that. And so hopefully people will be back. It's going to take a little while. Let me talk a little bit about this journey that we've been through since this pandemic started, and a little bit about how we move forward as well, because certainly we've learned some lessons. When in early March, like a lot of you, we started to get worried about COVID-19. We had been paying attention to Seattle, where COVID-19 had started earlier, they have a very large homeless population in Seattle. And so we were on the phone with people from Seattle. We were talking to national groups that do advocacy around homelessness and watching the CDC website. And so we did a lot of things that you would expect us to do. We intensified our cleaning. We put separators in between all of our beds, plastic sheeting. We added, if you came in now to serve dinner, for example, there's now a shield between the serving line and the guests and the servers. We tried to practice social distancing, not very well, frankly. So we did a lot of the obvious things, and early on we had access to some testing through our great partners at Healthcare for the Homeless, and these were the tests that took a couple of days to come back, sometimes close to a week. And we did some initial testing, and it turned out that 1 in 6 of symptomatic people were coming back positive at the men's and women's inn. And we were alarmed by that number. I did a little bit of projecting, thinking, well, it's probably greater than that. And we worked with Healthcare for the Homeless to try and line up some isolation beds for people, because once people tested positive, of course, we could not keep them in shelter. The State Department of Public Health agreed to let us do some universal testing based on that 1 in 6, and it turned out 1 in 3 of the folks we were testing were coming back positive, which had us absolutely, I think, flat out. It was a very scary and hard time finding isolation sites, quarantining people who had been exposed. What was fascinating is of the group that tested positive, again, this was universal testing, I would say about 38% were very mildly symptomatic or completely asymptomatic, and we would never have picked them up through temperature checks or through a questionnaire, a screening questionnaire, which we were doing all along. So it meant we really had to move quickly, and, you know, probably the hardest hit group really were folks that were older. We definitely saw much more severe illness in our older population. And again, our average age right now is about 55. So no surprise that we saw really the people that were the sickest were folks that were older and that had pre-existing conditions. Right now, we've tested probably close to 3,000 people in the city of Boston that are homeless. And the cumulative average right now is about 26%. Of folks that are testing are coming back positive. And again, still a high number of asymptomatic folks. But so we had to change everything, you know, like all of you who had to work from home and figure out a Zoom world. Well, we could do that for our administrative staff. Unfortunately, for the frontline staff, they had to be frontline. And so, you know, all of the shelters remained open. Our street teams were still out, including our outreach van. The kitchen crew and staff have really worked this from day one. The housekeeping staff, our frontline staff and housing, we could do some case management and some clinical work remotely, but everything else really was face-to-face and frontline. The expense and the logistics around really shifting what we did, a lot of challenges, right? Figuring it, none of this was budgeted for, just like for lots of other people. So figuring out how to, you know, pay hazard pay for frontline staff, how to make sure we had to quarantine a number of staff who were, of course, exposed to guests who tested positive. So we had to find a way to bring in non-essential staff and relief staff. And we had to change our entire meal structure, for example. We've gone to one-pot meals because we don't have the labor to do the kind of work we would do if you all were coming in or other volunteers were coming in to help us prep meals. So a lot of that has gone to much simpler meals, doing cereal and fruit for breakfast. So we made a lot of adjustments. Probably the biggest shift we made was, it was pretty clear to us that, you know, in March, we were still in overflow. So we had about 100 extra people in the men's and women's inn every night above and beyond our normal capacity. And that's really what Boston has done for the winter. We basically said, look, we're not going to turn people away in the winter. We'll find a spot for you. Well, in many ways that contributed to the very high numbers we saw because people were sleeping next to each other in the lobby. They were on mats or cots. our beds, frankly, were definitely not 6 feet apart when this all started, which is the CDC recommendation. So we worked very closely with the mayor's office. The mayor leased up a building from Suffolk University, and we were able to move 250 people out of our shelters and the city's own shelter into Suffolk. And then we were able to move about another 100 people into a building that the Davis Companies, which is a development firm, they had a building they were going to rehab on Com Ave that was vacant, and we moved about 100 people up there. So right now, our shelters are running at about 50% of capacity. And what was magical about Suffolk, it was private rooms with a bathroom, and that for us was an absolute game changer. But we had to we found out about Suffolk, and we literally had people in there in about 5 days, set up, you name it, everything from linens to making the beds to getting staff in there. It was quite a production. But it has been an absolute godsend because it allowed us to decrowd the shelters, create some social distancing space. It allowed us to not fill every bed in the shelter, getting us the 6 foot distance the CDC recommended. But every bit of it taxed us, as you can imagine. Some of you know, I've been at Pine Street a very long time, and I've never seen anything like this. Having said that, I have, there's not enough words I can say to the frontline staff that showed up every day, people who were afraid for their own families, who just, we had staff that literally did not go home for a month. Boston University gave us a very small dorm in the Fenway, and we used that for staff who didn't want to go home, staff who were worried about exposing their family, and staff, frankly, who were working, literally 2 shifts, back to back, and just, it was easier to just stay there than go home. So the staff got us through this, and then, our donors and volunteers remotely got us through, because without that level of support, we would never have been able to meet this challenge. I think what I would say is that, we didn't expect this to be a virus of equity. We understood that people who already had the most challenges would have both a higher positive rate, but also many more challenges kind of meeting the consequences of this virus, I guess I would say. And we have seen the same kind of racial breakdown that I think you've seen in the general population, which is people of color are overrepresented in terms of the number of positive cases. What's been interesting for us is, even though we've had a number of people hospitalized, of the 3,000 folks that we have tested across the city, we've had 12 deaths. Most of those deaths were people that were older, in their 70s, I would say. So, that was one thing that we were a little surprised by, in all honesty. We, I think, expected it to be higher. Now, we've got some people who are still very sick, got a handful of people still in the hospital, but most folks are actually back in shelter or back at the Suffolk dorm and, weathering through this. Let me talk for a minute about what the big takeaways have been for us. And I know a lot of you have been in to the Men's Inn and the Women's Inn to serve. And I can't tell you how grateful we are for that. Not just the help. We need the help doing the labor. But every time someone comes in, like your company, the guests really do get a sense that they're not as alone and as isolated. I can't think of anything worse than being homeless. And during this pandemic, the scare and the fear and the anxiety among the guests, we had guests that wouldn't agree to testing because they were afraid they tested positive, they wouldn't be able to come back and get their bed. They didn't want to get stuck in the hospital for weeks. And there was a lot of hand-holding and persuading and, commitments around, of course, we'll hold your bed and of course you can come back. But it was such a scary time. So having said that, probably lesson 1 for us was that overcrowding, we cannot go back to overcrowding the way we've done in Boston in the winter. We've got to come up with better solutions for this, and we've got to find a way to keep the shelter numbers low so we can comply with the social distancing, so we have enough protective equipment for people. But we are committed to looking for additional sites, housing sites eventually in the short term, some sites that we can use temporarily to keep the shelters from getting crowded again. So that's really job one. How do we figure that out? I think the second piece of this, there was a period of time where we could not take new people into the building because we were holding beds for people who were in isolation. And so it really shifted our front door. Normally you'd show up at Pine Street, we had a bed, we'd let you in. If it was wintertime, even if we didn't have a bed, we'd let you in. We had to rethink the front door, and we spent a lot of time talking to people who refer folks into Pine Street about, listen, you can't send people here right now, it's risky. And a lot of, well, what are we supposed to do? And a lot of interesting dialogues. Now we're having a very interesting dialogue at the state level about how to better manage discharges. So we've got to decrowd the shelters. We've got to look at the front door. One of the things we did through this is we remotely beefed up our front door team that was really trying to problem solve for people so they didn't have to come into shelter. And so that entire team, with the exception, I think, of 2 people who are on site, are actually taking calls from people saying, listen, I'm homeless, or I'm about to be homeless, or something happened. And we're problem solving with people. Everything from, can we get you a hotel room for a couple of nights, to what else could we do to help you stay where you are? Could we help you financially for a few weeks till we can talk to you about something longer term? It's really run the gamut. And then I think the third piece I would say, and I'm going to leave you with really 2 data points. The first data point is that when we tested in housing, we did not do universal testing. We have 850 tenants that we support in either housing Pine Street built or in their own apartments. When we did some testing there, we only are aware of 10 people in our housing who tested positive. Again, not universal testing, just symptomatic. One of those folks was quite sick. He's now back in his apartment, but everybody else was able to weather this at home just like you and I would, right? They isolated, we helped them with food, we went to the pharmacy, we supported whatever they needed. But the difference between having a room and a bathroom where you could shut the door and being in shelter was absolutely night and day. So there's no question housing and the ability to have some privacy really helped stop the spread of this virus in our housing. The second thing I would say is we just retested everybody in shelter, and we're now coming back with an average of 4%. We started out at 34%, we're now at 4%. What made the difference? Decrowding, having a dorm room, literally. And so the third takeaway for us is really that housing is healthcare, and we have got to figure out a way to be faster, cheaper, more creative about how we build housing for the people we serve, because it's now not just something we'd like to do, it's now really for some people a matter of life and death, and we've got to figure it out. And so we're spending a lot of time now really talking to the state about how do we go into this differently, and how do we now connect healthcare and housing in a way we've talked about for years. And now here's the impetus to really connect those two and figure out how housing interventions can really impact people's healthcare. So I'm going to stop. I don't know if people have questions.
And you had a couple of pictures too.
Oh, sorry. Right.
They're just.
Yeah, I do want to show people that. Let's see, Lori, oh, great. I'm not sure who's, putting up the pictures. Oh, this is a picture of the front desk. We had folks who sent over flowers to the staff, which was really lovely. Some of those small things really made a huge difference. People felt like they weren't so isolated and people were paying attention. So, Lori, can you go to the next one? This is the women's in staff, and you can see, the plastic barrier doing their social distancing. Phenomenal job they did. A lot of the staff you see here were some of the staff who literally didn't go home for one person there a month and a half, and worked, with very few days off straight through. They're an incredible crew. This is two of our case managers in housing over at one of our big housing sites in Jamaica Plain called the Bowditch School. One of the things we did was start a COVID fund that helped both the guests, but particularly the tenants, who many of whom are elderly, who were afraid to go out, who didn't have access to the normal way they could get food. So they literally, we got some food donated. We bought some food, and the staff here are doing really food gift baskets for the tenants that they left outside their doors. So it was one of the nicer things we were able to do through the support from the community, and it really made a difference for people. And it kept people home, which is the thing we were trying to get at. Lori, can you go to the next one? This is the kitchen crew. I think Barbara mentioned there was a nice piece in the Globe magazine over the weekend about just a thank you to the frontline staff. The kitchen crew did not miss a meal, despite the fact that we didn't have all of you helping us with dinner. You know, we didn't have anybody doing chop-a-thons. They had to pivot really quickly and creatively. And we managed to run the training program through all of this, much smaller version. You know, we're about half capacity. But the kitchen crew has been absolutely phenomenal through all this, I think. And this is the Suffolk dorm. And when I tell you that the units that we build at Pine Street for permanent housing, they're about 350 square feet. These dorms are about that size. If somebody gave us a dorm or we bought a dorm, we could easily retrofit one of these and put a small kitchenette in and really make it work. We're not looking for anything big or fancy, but if you ask me what would solve this, if they gave us that dorm tomorrow permanently, we'd be halfway there. Let's see, I think. These are masks. We had a ton of people in the community make us masks. I think we're actually still looking for masks, but really made a huge difference. We did not have masks in the beginning of this. It took us a long time to get our hands on personal protective equipment. It clearly made a difference, but masks and face shields were probably of all the things that were so welcome. I had a crash course in personal protective equipment that I don't want to learn about again, but it was quite the journey trying to get masks, period. So, and we just want to say thank you. We really miss having you in the building, and we just, you know, the day will come, but we'll look different when you come back. Things will be smaller, and I hope a little bit less chaotic and feel a little bit more manageable for people. But thank you. You've just been a magnificent partner, and we really appreciate all your help.
Thank you. And Maria's in there, so it's a good transition to Maria. She's right behind the sign. So yeah, we really miss it too. It's become part of us as well. So with that, thank you, Lindia. And please, we'll put the donate link in the chat box. So if you're inspired by all that you heard that Pine Street is doing in this difficult time, please join us in donating to Pine Street. So Maria, on to you. Thank you. Lindia, please say if you'd like to continue listening to the event. So Maria, just a quick introduction. We first met, I think it was the first week we founded S2N. You were one of our very first clients back in 2011. And so by way of background, a little background, Maria worked at Boston Scientific for many years on the drug-eluting stent program. So she has a long history of working on drug delivery technologies and is doing it again with Lyra Therapeutics. The notes I wrote to myself about Maria is the reason why I respect her as a leader so much. I wrote down smart, gutsy, and fun. So Maria, you are one of the bravest people I know, and this IPO story proves that. And I really admire you as a leader, and I'm excited for you to tell your story. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you to, first of all, give us the Lyra elevator pitch. Tell us what Lyra does.
Great, sure, thank you. And I just want to say it's been truly a privilege to participate in the Pine Street event that you have. It's such a wonderful organization. It's something I look forward to every year. So thank you for doing that. I think it's huge for Boston and for Pine Street. So a little bit about Lyra. So usually when I talk about it, I kind of start off with a question about, you know, how many people have heard of chronic rhinosinusitis and how many people have it. It's a little bit harder to do that on Zoom. But one of the things that we recognize, particularly when we were fundraising, is that often we weren't just talking to investors, we were often talking to patients. And that's because chronic rhinosinusitis is such a prevalent disease. And what it is, it's comprised of 4 cardinal symptoms: nasal congestion and obstruction, facial pain and pressure, nasal discharge, and a loss of smell. And, you know, and the loss of smell is such that patients can't taste the food that they're eating. This is a condition where it's like having sort of the worst cold of your life, but you have it every day and you live with this. And it's very debilitating. It's a chronic condition and it's inflammation of the sinuses. And it's a situation where steroids are effective, but there isn't a way to deliver those steroids really far back to the nasal passage. So oral steroids can work well, but that's not a chronic therapy. And topical steroids simply just don't get far back enough. They don't stick around long enough, and patients are not compliant. So what we did at Lyra is we created a miniaturized drug delivery system, which is placed deep into the nasal passage with these little applicators, and they're biocompatible. They sit in the nasal passage and they deliver drug in a very consistent way for 6 months in the target location. And what we found in our phase 1 is that our patients were doing significantly better. So that's what Lyra is about. At least our first products, and we have 2 of them, are targeting chronic rhinosinusitis. And we're providing a therapy for patients who have failed medical management, and they really don't have any other option other than surgery. And as we know, surgery is very invasive, and it's also not curative. It's a palliative treatment for these patients. Oh, can't hear you.
I said, thank you for the overview, great overview. And I thought before we get into the whole IPO story, maybe we could back up a bit and talk about the decision to explore going public, when you started that process, how you determined this was a good idea.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's a long process, and and what we have noticed is pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies tend to go public pretty early, sometimes in the preclinical stage. Medical device companies tend to not go public until they're commercial. Right? And we're a combination therapy. It's a drug delivery system. When you look at it, it looks like a device. However, it is regulated as a drug. So the primary mode of action of our product is the drug, not the device. There really isn't a therapeutic effect of the device. So we felt that we believe that we could go public, but we explored it. So what we did, and it was really a 15-month process when we started it. We began talking to bankers, and we really spoke to all the banks out there. And they will all take a meeting, and you can tell whether they believe that you can go public. What would happen is, they would continue the conversation, and then they would introduce us to the analyst. And that was always a really good sign when they wanted to take that next step and make that introduction to the analyst. Then it became pretty clear to us that this was a possibility for our company. And then and the other thing that we kept hearing from from colleagues who had done this is the bankers are important, but the analysts are even more important, because the long-term relationship that you have with the bank is with the analyst. So we did a very extensive interviewing process of trying to identify which analysts really understood what we were trying to do at Lyra. And that was a 15-month process, all in all.
So you mentioned that it wasn't so much how you defined the company as drug or device that really tipped the scale. You said it was more about market opportunity, right?
Yes. So there were 3 things, right? Regardless of what you are, you will get placed either in the med tech bucket or the drug bucket. And we had some analysts who put us in the in the drug bucket and some who put us in the med tech bucket. That actually became a really short conversation with us. And it's for 3 reasons. One is the quality of our investors, and that was key, and it's something that I probably didn't appreciate, when we did our Series B. But the quality of the investors we had that had funded the company was critical. The second was that our market is huge. It's millions of patients. 17 million patients in the US have chronic rhinosinusitis. 8 million patients are treated, and 4 million each year fail medical management, and that's our population. And the third was we have a very differentiated position where there's a validated market with these patients, but we don't compete with anybody. So our products are for those patients who have failed the topical steroid sprays and they have no other option. And this is for CRS patients that there really isn't a drug that's approved for these patients. What's approved is for a small subset of patients that have polyps. So it was really the quality of our investors, the huge market potential, and the differentiated positioning.
And then I know sometimes device companies have struggled to go public because it's hard to position them as a platform.
Yeah.
And, how important was being able to talk a platform story and engaging the investors?
Yeah, that was really important. And we did get that question from every investor, and it was part of our pitch deck. It was important for us to be able to demonstrate that we have 2 products in development, which we do, both for chronic rhinosinusitis patients. Our first product are for surgically naive patients, which represent about 60% of patients that come into an ENT's office. And that's our miniaturized drug delivery system. And then we have our second product, which is for patients who have had a prior surgery, same platform, but the anatomy is different. So this is designed for that larger anatomy. And then in addition to that, we were able to talk about the other areas that we are exploring from our market potential, areas like allergic rhinitis, and also delivery from the nose into the brain for neurological conditions. And that really got investors very interested in the platform.
Okay, so now we have the foundation of the story you went out with to explore going public. Give us the timeline of the process when the pandemic hit. Just walk it. I think when we did this, it was over a glass of wine, so it was probably even more exciting.
Yeah.
But
yes. Yeah. So, it's, we began working, like I said, it was 15 months. It was JP Morgan about a year and a half ago. And yeah, once we decided, you write the S1, you file it confidentially. We flipped the S1 public and filed it March 6th. And if all of you remember, it was the following week when Boston went into shutdown. So literally the next week after we filed it, the IPO was off the table at that point. And so there was a lot of uncertainty, and we just assumed, well, this isn't going to happen. Let's see, maybe we can resurrect it later, maybe in the fall. But we continued to sort of watch the market, and the market there was a free fall that happened. There were a couple of companies that went public. We looked at them and they were, very different from us. And so we continued to stay in touch with our bankers, and Bank of America was our lead left. They were excellent throughout this whole process. The banks kept saying, we believe you can still IPO. It was really like a roller coaster for us. It was like, on, off, should we, shouldn't we? And then finally, it was sort of towards the end of April that a company called Oric went public. And that's when all of our banks were like, now's the time. this is the time to go public. We got with our investors. Our investors were very supportive. It was really critical to go out there with a raise, and our raise was $50 million, but a raise where you could have all of your investors would fully support it, meaning that the message was that we're fully covered for that $50 million raise with our inside investors, which we were. We decided Sunday, we're going ahead, and literally Monday morning, 7 a.m., we began having our road show. And it was waking up at 7 a.m. With our executive team and back-to-back meetings on the phone to about 8 p.m. in our slippers. You know, it was really a very different process from what we would have done, which would have been a 2-week road show that was really crunched into 3.5 days. And every day thinking we have no idea what the next day is going to bring us in terms of the market. So it did take a lot of courage. But it was really by day number 2, I would say, it became very clear that we were going to be able to do this. And we were very oversubscribed even by day 2. The investors really got the story and liked it.
And then you priced on the Thursday, is that right?
We priced Thursday night on April 30th, that evening. And then we started trading the following Friday.
And how did that feel? All this happening virtually, all this, and how did that feel at that point?
It was very exciting, and it was really exciting to be able to experience it with your family, right? Because I had my 2 college kids were home. My my son, who's working in Germany, came home from Germany, and my niece from New York. We were all here. We could all experience it. We could experience it with a company, maybe in a way that would have been harder to do if we were on the road. But and the NASDAQ did a really nice job of kind of a sort of a virtual first day of trading where all of our employees could join by Zoom and we could see the first trade all together. It was very exciting.
How did that work? Do you virtually rang the bell or something? How did that even work?
We did. So there were 2 things we did. We did the virtual first trade where we could sort of see when the first trade came in. And we did that via Zoom. And then the following week on Wednesday, we had a virtual bell ringing. And so each employee would tape themselves clapping their hands. And then we sent it into NASDAQ. I did a little, a 1-minute spiel. And then they projected all of this onto Times Square. And then we could all observe it together. And so we weren't there in person, but it was so, it was just really an amazing experience to see each of the employees who had such an important hand in creating our company and our product to be up on the tower. We'll never forget it. It really was a unique experience and very proud moment for our company.
And so now you're a public company CEO. I confess I was terrified to ask you to speak because I thought, oh my gosh, I don't want to, I know that you have to be very careful what you say now, and that's not been what you've experienced in the past. So double thank you for speaking today as such a new public company CEO. How has it been different for you managing now a public company?
So, it is very different. We do have to be very careful about your communications, about the information. We are now in phase 2. We will have our phase 2 data at the end of the year. And so, that's about all we can say about it at this point. So there were many things that have changed. We have our, at the board level, we have our committees that are in place. So how we run our board meetings, that has certainly changed. The other thing that has been very different for our employees is that, we, as many startups, you sort of grow up being bootstrapped, and when you think about how you spend money and your timelines, there's that triangle of quality, cost, and speed, and we never compromise on quality. But cost and speed is the decision that usually is at play. And in the past, when we were small, cost is something that we were very careful about how we spent our money, and now we are very careful still, but speed is so critical right now. So it is a little bit of a change in mindset now that we successfully brought in nearly $60 million, and we had even done a crossover round before that. So the company is well funded, and our priority is ensuring that we get to our milestones as quickly as we can.
Yeah, and I imagine too, managing employees who are now looking at the stock price, and you're probably looking at the stock price. So how do you compartmentalize and get your work done?
Yeah. So, I do try to limit myself to looking at the stock. You do. And as a CEO, it's important that you do it, but you can't be obsessed by it. I'll look at it in the morning, and I'll look at it at the end of trade. Nothing has changed with our company from the day we went public to today. And if anything, we're closer to our milestone. But yet the price goes up and down, and it feels like there's no rhyme or reason for that. So it really is put your heads down and execute. And that's the best thing we can do for our stock price is ensure that, we do what we said we were going to do. And I'm very confident that we're in a very strong position to do that.
Okay, and I'm going to warn everyone, I have one last question for Maria, and then you're on. So please put your questions in the chat if you have any for Maria. My one last question is, we also talked a bit about the lasting implications of COVID. I mean, obviously it severely impacted your IPO experience, but how do you look at what lasting implications there might be just to the healthcare system or to Lyra?
Yeah. So I think there's two lasting implications. And I'll talk about the implications for our business in the healthcare system second. The first is, I think these virtual roadshows are probably here to stay. And that's good news for those of you who are in small companies. It actually was a very good process. It wasn't very expensive. We weren't spending thousands of dollars flying around. It was 3.5 days. And it was very effective. So I do believe that the banking community believes that we'll probably be seeing more of these virtual roadshows. In terms of healthcare, and I think this is important for particularly medical device companies, is for ear, nose, and throat. ENT is a way that viruses, the physicians that are doing these procedures and surgeries are more vulnerable with the spread of coronavirus and other viruses. So there has been a lot of discussion and roundtables with ENTs about how can this impact your business in the future, even post a vaccine. And what the ENTs believe is that it will push their practice more towards minimally invasive procedures and out of surgery, being able to do more procedures in the office to minimize the exposure of the patient and the physician. And so I think that's a good thing. I think it's good for our industry. Our products that we're developing are all minimally invasive. They're done in an office setting. And they help the patient to avoid surgery. So we think that it's a step in the right direction for the treatment of these patients. and probably a long-lasting effect of the coronavirus.
Yeah, and certainly across all our clients, everyone, I
Yeah.
would encourage everyone to have their coronavirus story. It affects some hugely. We have clients in telehealth. We know in the short term there have been a delay of procedures and trials, and that affects people as well. But I don't know of one company that can avoid thinking about it, both in the short term and the long term. So now I'm going to open up for questions. I don't know if anyone has any questions for Maria. I don't see any in the chat bot yet. Rachel, you have one?
I always have questions. So Maria, thanks. That's really
Hi, Rachel.
awesome. Hi, it's nice to meet you. And just a quick plug for the Pine Street event. I had so much fun seeing Amy and Maria both in a hairnet at this last one. So you guys should absolutely support, and all the information's in the chat, but that's one of my favorite events too.
If you donate $1,000, I'll put up the picture of us in the hairnet. Maria, are you game?
I am.
Anyone? I will do the reveal of the hairnet photos. I have it waiting.
So Maria, I think my question is, this had to be, and you've mentioned a little bit, incredibly stressful. Your team is all remote. You're trying to figure all of this out. Any kind of lessons learned or tips about how to keep a team really on board with the decision making that I can't even imagine?
Yeah. A few things. I mean, one is, in times like this, over communicate. There's the whole pandemic, but it's also what's happening with Black Lives Matter, which is so important. So what we have found is over communicating. And so doing, Zoom meetings with all the employees, but even more important, just picking up the phone and calling employees individually and checking in on them. I think that's been really important for us as a company. And the other thing is I have relied a lot on other CEOs. There is a biotech CEO forum that Jody Morrison had pulled together. And during the pandemic, it's a little less frequent, but it was every Monday morning at 7:30. And we would share experience and share learnings. And that was really critical, because I took a lot of those ideas and brought them to our company, and we were able to implement those. And it was things like SOPs to put in place to protect employees, to communicating and how to communicate with the employees during the pandemic.
Awesome. So we have a question from the chat bot. So, one person was commenting that it's, investors seem to like drug or device and seem very wary of combination products. Could you kind of explain how you educated folks about combination products and some of the things you may have used in your toolkit to convince them?
That's an excellent point. It's you're put in this gray area, and that's not a good thing. You're kind of a tweener. You're not a device, you're not a drug, and you kind of end up in no man's land. So, in our situation, we really didn't want to dwell on that. We were very clear in the beginning that this is a drug product because it's regulated as a drug, right? It's reimbursed as a drug product. And the person at our company who was pitching with me, Corinne Noyes, was previously a Biogen. So clearly we did come across as a drug company. Now, at the same time, also clearly a tweener. I think what we did is we quickly sort of moved away from that and focused on the market potential. And the fact that there's 17 million patients that have this, that they don't have a good therapy, and that we are providing something that can really help all of these patients. And so the conversation quickly shifted towards our differentiated product and the millions of patients that we can help to treat.
Great. So another question is, at this point, do you expand clinical trials? Do you go to R&D? What's the next big step for you all?
Well, so our next big step is really completing our clinical program on Lyra 210, and that's in the surgically naive patients. So given that we are a drug product, we do have to do a pivotal phase 3. We're currently in a phase 2 study, and we have to do our pivotal phase 3 trial. That'll be our next step once we have our phase 2 data in hand, and we'll have at least the top line data at the end of the year. The second thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to prove that we're a platform. And so that means getting Lyra 220 into the clinic. And we expect to do that at the end of next year. So, those are really what we have to do. In addition to that, is we need to add staff. We have several open positions right now that we're currently looking to fill. So we're building the company, and we're focusing on our upcoming milestones.
And I'm sure that hiring is a bit different now too. We're finding that as well, that interviewing and recruiting and hiring has taken on a whole. So any suggestions for people out there trying to job hunt at Lyra or elsewhere in this current climate?
Network. Really more important than anything. I mean, yeah, we do get a lot of candidates, and when you come in through a recommendation, it does help us sort of filter the candidates. So I think that's a suggestion for people who are looking. There are companies hiring like ours, those companies that are well funded. There are many. The whole interviewing process is very different. It's all being done via Zoom, and I have to say it's working pretty well. We're doing our Zoom interviews, and it's working out.
Yeah, no, we're having the same experience, and I tell people, somebody like you has a bit more time. Not that you have much time, but if you were traveling all the time, it would be a different story. So take advantage of that a little bit. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Well, that would make sense, right? That I have more time. But what I am finding, and I think what I hear from others also, is that it feels like I have less time, and it feels like the day kind of starts really early and kind of goes into the evening, and I'm not sure I understand exactly why that is, and I've been hearing it from others, and many of you may have experienced the same thing, but it does feel like the day is fully packed with meetings. So I think we're probably doing much more also. Yeah. I use that time to go for a walk, because if I don't have to be on a Zoom. So important. It is important. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're going to wrap it up in a minute. We're almost done with the Zoom. Maria, somebody asked what type of service we provided to your team. I don't know if you have a quick word about your perspective, what we do, which I always have trouble explaining.
Yes. So S2N helped us tremendously with our market research, really. When we were focused on the cardiovascular, understanding, sort of what the customer needs are, understanding what the market is, our positioning. And I've always said this, one of the things, and I've worked with a lot of market research firms, but the biggest complaint I've had with market research firms is I almost felt like oftentimes they tell you what you want to hear. With S2N and with, in particular with your team, Amy, we don't get that. We really get sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And there really isn't any sugarcoating it, right? And that's so critical for us to be able to get the information and then to really think about, maybe maybe this isn't the right focus. Maybe we need to be thinking about this product differently. And it's so important to get that kind of information. And as you know, Amy, we did end up pivoting from cardiovascular into ear, nose, and throat. And
Yeah.
I really think that a lot of the work that you did was critical for that.
Well, I remember when you called and we talked about it, you said, what about the sinus? I'm like, I love it. Let's talk to, we talked to a handful of people and we said,
Right.
thumbs up, there's
Yes.
something here. So I remember that very well. So before we go, just a reminder to donate to Pine Street. I am gonna share my screen one last time. And I apologize. So I hope you make it worth it here, but some hairnet pics. Rachel, you're in there too.
All right. Did you get the $1,000? Because I see me in a hairnet.
I know. So this is everyone's encouragement. There's the link again. If you can donate to Pine Street, that would be great. I'm embarrassing myself too. And Rachel, you're in there. Brian, you're in there. A lot of the team is in there. So you can see us live action serving at Pine Street. This is the last event we did before everything kind of shut down, but thank you, Rachel, thank you, Maria. I don't know if Linda, you're still on. Thank you, and I appreciate everyone's support. I'm glad we could do something for Pine Street when we can't physically be there. So appreciate it, and I think we'll call it.
Thank you, Amy. Linda had to leave for another call, but I just want to thank everyone for your support. It's great to see everyone and be a part of this.
Yeah, thank you, Scotty. Scotty's been our partner throughout the 10 years we've been doing this, so thank you so much. Okay, bye everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.